Welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to see you all. Thank you so much for joining us for this presentation by Kevin Abourezk with the title Mending the Sacred Hoop. My name is Geraldine Decoto, and I'm a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa. I co-direct the Toward Right Relationship program with Native Peoples program with Paula Palmer, and Paula's on the screen today too. Paula and I are joining you from the unceded territory of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute Nations, also known as the Boulder Valley of Colorado. I'll introduce our speaker in a moment, but first, I'd like to introduce our colleague, Mackenzie Barton Rowledge, who will be handling our tech issues tonight. Very important. Mackenzie, would you like to say hello?
For sure. Hi, everyone.
There
My
she
name is
is,
Mackenzie.
outlined in green.
I use Z, here, or she, her pronouns, and I am on Duwamish land. The Duwamish are one of many Coast Salish tribes. This is also called Seattle. I am looking forward to our program tonight. Thanks, Geraldine.
Thank you, Mackenzie. A few notes before we begin. Please keep your microphones off. We have quite a number of people on the call today, almost 50, and we're very happy about that. But background noises can be distracting, so thank you for keeping your microphones off. We've set up a chat box so that you can only send messages to Paula and Mackenzie. If you have tech questions, send a chat message to Mackenzie. If you would like to ask a question of Kevin during the Q&A that will follow his presentation, please write your question in the chat box and send it to Paula. She will read through the questions in the chat and address them to Kevin. So send tech questions to Mackenzie and questions for Kevin to Paula. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our friend, Kevin Abourezk. We met Kevin when he participated in a Toward Right Relationship workshop here at the University, CU Boulder, and he has since helped us facilitate the workshop, both online and in person, and has offered the workshop on his own. Most of us know Kevin Abourezk, who is Sicangu, Lakota, through his award-winning work as a journalist. He was the managing editor of Indians.com and longtime reporter and assistant city editor for the Lincoln Star Journal. He is currently deputy managing editor of ICT News, formerly Indian Country Today. Kevin is also a film producer and a community organizer. And I would like to add that Kevin is quite a storyteller. So tonight we're going to hear Kevin's compelling story of his plan to help reconnect Native people to the land. Kevin's talk today, titled Mending the Sacred Hoop, is about his work to create an eco-village, which they call Niskite Tanwan. I'm probably slaughtered that, but I wanted to try it out of respect. So near where he lives in Lincoln, Nebraska, and this will be a place where Indians can live in the way they want on their own lands. He challenges the idea that Indians should be fixed on their reservations, acknowledging that 80% of us live off reservation and using that fact as underpinning for his dream of finding land for local Indian people. I can't think of when I've been more inspired than I am learning about Kevin's work and the potential for eco-villages in Nebraska and across the United States. So let's welcome Kevin and hear his story. Kevin?
Oh, thank you so much, Geraldine. That's beautiful. Really appreciate that. It's really great to see everyone here tonight and certainly recognize a few of you. Mark, good to see you, Judy, Rick, of course. Wonderful to see all of you here. Really glad to join you. Thank you so much, Paula, Geraldine. Thank you for all your help, Mackenzie. I started, got in connection with Toward Right Relationship at this point, maybe 6 years ago or so, when I visited Boulder with my colleague here, Margaret Jacobs, to do, well, to interview Geraldine and Paula for a podcast that we have called Reconciliation Rising. And as part of that, we took part in the workshop, The Roots of Injustice, Seeds of Change. And, it just kind of floored me, to be honest with you. It was such a powerful method, vehicle for teaching non-Native people, especially about the history of genocide, indigenous genocide in America. I decided to come home and, bring it back here. And, as part of that, I had to write a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the original peoples of where I live, Lincoln, Nebraska, and Lancaster County. And that took a lot of work. It surprisingly took a lot of work to discover that. I interviewed something like 6 or 7 local historians, and finally found one here, David Wisher, who's the author of a book called An Unspeakable Sadness. This is a book about the history of displacement of indigenous people in Nebraska. And through reading that book, learned that really the last 4 tribes that were considered landholders in this area were the Oto-Missouri, the Kansa, Pawnee, and Omaha peoples. And it was the Oto-Missouri actually that were the very last to leave this area. So that led to all kinds of things. Honestly, Margaret Jacobs and I came home and we decided we were going to do what we could to welcome back the Oto-Missouri people to this area. And we've done that ever since. For 4 years now, we've held a celebration every September 20th called Oto-Missouri Day. And we bring home Oto-Missouri people from their home in mostly northeast Oklahoma, a place called Red Rock, Oklahoma. We bring them back to Lincoln and we celebrate them. We have the mayor read a proclamation. We have all kinds of local dignitaries, drum groups, dancers. We make a real, usually 2-day event of it even. And so this is coming up again, actually. So we're preparing for that right now. This all started with our visit to Boulder. So, in some ways, this is kind of coming full circle here. So I'm really glad to be back here. It's always wonderful to be back in both of your companies, Geraldine and Paula. So with that, I do want to start and first of all, introduce myself in my traditional Lakota way. Hamadakyapi, Chawashde Anape Chuza Bilo, Tachanku Cheska Machia Bilo, Ma Lakota. In my Lakota tongue, I've introduced myself as Lakota. I've issued a warm handshake to each of you and addressed you all as relatives. In our Lakota way, we believe that we are all related. And so as I reach out to you, I reach out to you in that way. So a little bit about me to start off with. I grew up in South Dakota, not far from the Rosebud Indian Reservation, kind of south central South Dakota. As Geraldine mentioned, Sicangu Lakota and also Oglala Lakota. My mother is Oglala. So both of those. Grew up in South Dakota and went to college at the University of South Dakota and then moved here to Lincoln in 1999 on a journalism internship here at the Lincoln Journal-Star and started there in 1999 and spent 18 years there until 2017 when I left for Native American journalism, Indians.com, that's Indians with a Z. And then from there, about 6 years after that, left for Indian Country Today. And I've been there for a little over 2 years. My job there essentially entails, assigning people stories, oversee a number of reporters, all of our freelancers. And so I edit stories, post them on our website, all of that. So, I come at this from many different angles, but that's my work angle. But the other angle that I come from is a local community organizer. Some would say an activist, but also somebody who, really does work both within and outside the system, I guess is how I would say that. I see certainly benefits to both. But I want to start tonight by describing something that happened back in, this would have been April of 2022. And this is going to be the lead up to, how we landed on this idea of an eco-village here near Lincoln, Nebraska. So in April of 2022, I was contacted by an organization here, Friends of Wilderness Park. And we had learned that there was going to be a very large residential development built right across from Wilderness Park. In Lincoln, Wilderness Park is the largest park that we have here. And this residential development is going to bring something like 2,000 people, almost 700 housing units, retail, and both apartments and townhouses and individual homes. Just an incredible footprint that it's going to leave right across from our community's backyard, essentially Wilderness Park. It was also going to be built, sadly, will be built at this point, across from our city's oldest, historic, most heavily used Inipi grounds. If you don't know what an Inipi is, it's a sweat lodge. It's a Native American sweat lodge. We have a number of very sacred rites as Lakota people, Sundance being one of them. But one of them, and the most, often used ceremony that we have is our Inipi, is our sweat lodge. And here in Lincoln, this sweat lodge in particular has a lot of history to it. The Indian Religious Freedom Act of 1978 is what finally allowed us to practice these ceremonies as we wish, rather than in secret as we had to do up until that point. This sweat lodge had been operating well before that. But when it finally became legal to do this, this particular sweat lodge became our community sweat lodge and has been really ever since. We have a number of other sweat lodges around here, but this is definitely considered, our community sweat lodge. So this housing unit is going to be right across the street. And it's not that we ever expected that nothing would be built across the street, but we didn't expect this, and along with Friends of Wilderness Park, really, really petitioned our city leaders to reject this idea. And it came to a head during one particular city council meeting where the council, voted to do this. It was a really emotional council meeting, and a lot of people showed up. We had over 100 people that came and spoke, every one of them, against this project. And it was tough walking out of there after hearing them make that decision to allow this project to happen. But the worst part about it wasn't even that. It was the fact that our city leaders refused to look at us, refused to even speak the word sweat lodge or Inipi to address our concerns really in any way at all. It was erasure. And to walk out of there feeling that was just incredibly devastating to all of us. And we all had tears in our eyes afterward. And, so the next morning I woke up and was feeling very raw. And so that morning, I got a call from a friend who, at the time, the two of us were serving on the Indian Center, Lincoln Indian Center Board of Directors. My friend's name is Larry. And so he called me that morning. And he started his conversation like this. And you might appreciate the irony in this, a non-native man saying this to a native man. But he said, "Kevin, I've had a vision." He said, "I see 7 teepees on that hill where that development's going to be built." And just as he said that, I had this image in my head, this vision. And I knew in that moment that that's what had to be done. And that was a tough proposition, we make decisions like this in our lives. And as Indigenous people, when we commit to something like that, to fulfill a vision and to help somebody else fulfill their vision, in this case, I guess, that's what we do, until it's done or we're done. And so that's what we did. And we spent the next, 3 weeks really preparing to do this. We held many meetings, started inviting a lot of people into this, did everything we could in secrecy, and prepared to, over the course of one evening, starting around midnight, set up 7 teepees in the dark and essentially occupy land that wasn't ours, where we hadn't been invited to occupy, in protest of this development, and more so in protest of the erasure of our Indigenous concerns, our Indigenous people. So what happened? It came the night to do this, and it was a tough call to make, to finally pull the trigger and say, "Let's go." It was very scary to have to be the one that, puts all this into action, but it happened. And Took us about 6 hours, and the sun came up that next morning, and it was just this beautiful, beautiful sight to see these seven teepees, in a half circle facing east toward the sunrise. And we stayed there for 16 days, and it's one of the most beautiful things I've been a part of. Really, in many ways, has come to define the work that I do, and the things that I've gotten many other people involved in doing. And one of the big takeaways we had, and certainly, that protest was amazing for a lot of other reasons. We spent 16 days essentially unsure when the police were going to, force us to leave, tear down our teepees, unsure when all of us were going to be led away in handcuffs or something else. We had some people that just drove up there and wanted to yell at us and threaten us, and so it was really a tense time over those 16 days that we spent on that hill. But we came incredibly close as a family, as a group of people. This was where the Nisquithe Prayer Camp was born. That was the name of our protest, by the way. But it's become the name of our organization now that is really seeking land in this eco village. Um, one of the big lessons I took away as somebody, attempting to lead, I guess, people in a protest like this in this day and age, um, was the need for myself to start to decolonize my thinking and really try to separate myself and the things that I really think about or worry about. Um, I needed to it was really hard to divorce my thinking of, what are the people I know going to think about me? What is my employer going to think about me? What's my wife's employer going to think about me? At that point, honestly, leading up to that, I was friends with the mayor, and what's the mayor going to think about me? I was even serving on this mayoral committee called the Commission on Human Rights. Am I going to have to leave that commission? I was um, somebody who was kind of thought of here as kind of an up and comer in some ways, you know what I mean? And I had to let all that go. I had to accept that in order to do this the right way, in a way that's faithful to the concerns of my people here, my community, I had to let all of that go. And that was hard. That was really hard to do. And it's been hard to stay doing that ever since, because that's really what this has entailed, is trying to let go of the need to conform, the need to appease, the powers that be all around me. So that was really a big part of decolonization. The other part of decolonization was this, and this is something that we all learned there, and I'm sure other people have learned this in similar protests, that one of the greatest catastrophes that occurred as a result of colonization was breaking the connection of indigenous people with nature, with Unchi Maka, Mother Earth, uh, deceiving us into believing that we are not related to the land that we walk upon. We're not related to the animals that walk upon this land, that we're separate somehow, and that it's upon us to extract what we can from Mother Earth, and that's okay to do. These kinds of things, and I was there. I was in that thinking up until that point, and I mean, I had so many people try to sort of educate me over the years and really pound this into my head. But it wasn't until I was up on that hill, a free man for the first time in my life. That's what that was, to be there in that place, a free man, that I really understood the power of that and the importance of that. So when we left the hill, after 16 days, one of the things we determined ourselves to do was to continue to meet in this way and to continue to reestablish, reconnect ourselves to Mother Earth, um, and hopefully help others to do the same. So one of the things that resulted in that is we started doing teepee encampments. And our first teepee encampment was held in early October of last year. And essentially what this is, it's a 4-day teepee encampment that we hold about 20 minutes north of Lincoln on some really beautiful ground, unplowed land, forests and hills, and just really amazing place. And we have some really good, allies in our community that have allowed us to use that land. So we go there for 4 days, and it's really an incredible event. We set up pretty usually around a dozen teepees or so. We have inipis or sweat lodge ceremonies every night. And we have a lot of people that come and they learn about Native American culture and history and language. And we have this world-renowned cultural educator, Steve Tamayo, who was just named the National Endowment for Humanities Educator of the Year. Well, he comes and sets up usually for 4 days during this event. He'll set up in a teepee or outside a teepee, and people will just come and learn how to make arts and crafts. But more importantly, they learn about Native American history. They learn about the language. They learn about Lakota societies and these kinds of things from Steve, who, by the way, is, one of the most humorous people I know. And everybody always walks away feeling better. And it's an incredible thing. And that's just one of the many things that occurs during this teepee encampment. So we had our first one back in October of last year, and we're going to be doing these twice a year. And by the way, we invite anybody on this call to join us in this event. So the second one we had was in late April of this year, and this event in particular was even a little more powerful in many ways than that first teepee encampment. One of the things that became so clear to us in this spring encampment especially, was how this event has made us realize what it means, what this idea, this concept of the sacred hoop, the medicine hoop, that some believe in our culture, including the Lakota holy man Black Elk, Nicholas Black Elk, had believed that the sacred hoop of his people, the Lakota people, was broken at the massacre at Wounded Knee. And I would say, even before that, it began, of course, with the genocide of the Tonka, the buffalo. Um, and we've kind of finally begun to understand what this medicine hoop, what this sacred hoop is. And it isn't just the physical, it isn't just, Native American people living, you know, uh, in the wilderness somewhere, kind of trying to live outdoors or even learn about how to garden or raise buffalo. All those things are important, but it's more than that. It's so much more than that. There's a spiritual thing here that happens when we have our TP encampment, especially this past one. There's an energy that becomes palpable in that place, and it's something that everybody talks about who comes into that circle. They feel this energy, they feel this power infused in everything that we do, and everything becomes sacred. Everything becomes a ceremony. And as we're in that space, we start to feel finally just how connected we are to all creation. And we start to feel that we can be healed by the land, that the land can heal us. We can heal the land. I mean, that's the other thing too. We forget our place. We've forgotten our place. And within this whole natural existence, this physical existence, we're just as much a part of it as anything. And we're just as important to healing the land, to healing the plants, the animals, as they are to healing us. All of this, I sort of consider us, humans as kind of the lost tribe of Unchi Maka. We've forgotten our place in this world. But when we find that place, it is so powerful. And to me, that's the sacred hoop. To me, that's what we need to mend, is our reconnection to that and understanding that that's our role in this place, and we have to remember that. Otherwise, this is all gone. And maybe it's too late anyway. But one of the things that I've always had my elders teach me is that we need to think 7 generations ahead. And that means that even if I don't necessarily have hope for what's going to happen in 10, 20, 50 years, I have to have hope for my grandchildren's grandchildren, and what kind of world that can I possibly create for them, and how can I start to restore some of these things that have been lost. And some of these things I'm not going to see happen in my lifetime. I've accepted that. Um, doesn't mean that I shouldn't take these first steps. That doesn't mean that we as an indigenous community shouldn't start to rebuild what we can, remind ourselves of our place in this world. So that's what happened this spring encampment, and what it's led to is us beginning to travel and research and start to think about what this could look like and how to do this in a good way. It's not just about getting land. We'll get land, and we have plenty of people who want to support us, but we always can use more help in that regard. But it's one of these things at this point. I mean, so let me back up here and say, there's this idea that we discuss a lot about land back, about, this sort of vision or dream of, settlers coming to their senses essentially and granting large tracts of land to indigenous people because it's the right thing to do. I know it sounds like I'm making fun of that, and in some ways I am. I'm sorry, but it's something that especially indigenous people in the circles I've walked in have come to realize just isn't gonna happen for the most part. There are tribes, don't get me wrong, there are tribes that have gotten land back. There are, certain places that have gotten these kinds of large tracts back. But that's different than what we're looking for. It's much different than what we're looking for. And what we're looking for is something that this world right now doesn't quite understand and can't quite grasp. So it's something that, I'm going to do my best to explain here. So as Geraldine mentioned, more than 80% of Native American people live off of reservations. Um, you know, and so many of us, came here for reasons that, and some of us were not necessarily forced here, but definitely enticed by various federal relocation programs and such. But a lot of us have moved here in to these places because of jobs, because of education. I've come here for college. A lot of us have stayed in these places. There are a lot of cities around the country that have large Native populations. Denver, as many of you know, is one of them. Minneapolis is another one, Los Angeles, Omaha, Nebraska, and Lincoln. Lincoln, we estimate around 4,000 Native American people here, and the school system itself um, counts as many as 140 different tribes represented within the nearly 360 Native American students here at Lincoln Public Schools. So we are definitely a large and pan-Indian indigenous community here in Lincoln. This was always happening. If you think about this, this was always happening. And we've gotten so fixed about the way we think about tribes and the way we think about indigenous identity in this world. We came to decide at some point that, you know, tribes that existed as of, let's say, 1890 or 1854 or 1833, whenever these different censuses would take place, those are the tribes that will exist from now on, and none other shall ever, be created or exist beyond those. And I realize I'm talking about something controversial here. There's a difference between a federally recognized tribe and a community such as ours, beginning to understand that we are a tribe as well. We're not necessarily ever going to seek, even state recognition and probably never federal recognition or anything like that. That'd be beautiful. I think that's something that maybe long term we should start really thinking about. Um, but for now, we are just a pan-Indian indigenous community here in Lincoln, Nebraska, that is trying to really get a sense of itself, trying to really define what it is and how we can work as a community to improve our lives. And that's one of the things that we're hoping to do here. Niskithe, the word Niskithe means salt water. It's an Omaha word. Lincoln and Lancaster County were built on salt beds. And, tribes, this was kind of what we would consider no man's land. Tribes would come from all over to gather salt. And, from what we've learned from our research, this wasn't a place where warfare would typically happen between tribes because everybody needed access to this resource. So they would come here and they would gather salt and they would take it back to their communities. The Omaha called it Niskithe Tongo. And that's how you pronounce that, by the way, Geraldine. But well, yeah, Niskithe Tongo, and that means salt village or salt town. The name of the eco village that we're trying to establish, our working title right now is Niskithe Tongo, salt village. What is an eco village? So let me back up here a little bit. So one of the things that we did back after our October encampment last year was we visited a place in Alabama called Ikunivalicha. And this is a Muskogee eco village that was established about 6 years ago by a family of Muskogee, led by a language preservationist, man named Marcus. And Marcus had tried for many years among his people, the Muskogee, to revitalize and preserve the Muskogee language. And like so many language preservationists, he came to realize that, it's just a losing battle, is everything that they tried, including immersion, just wasn't working because every night these children would have to go home and there was no necessity for them to continue to practice that language. There was nobody there to speak the language with, and they just couldn't compete with that. And so he began thinking about, how can we preserve our language? And what he came to realize was that we need to live as Muskogee people and as much as possible isolate ourselves from the outside world as we attempt to restore our language. So that's what they did. About 6 years ago, they found land in Alabama and they established this village, first on 50 acres, very small, relatively. Today, amazingly, they now have 14,000 acres. And there are 16 people living in that village currently. I got to visit the village back in early November of last year, and there were about 60 indigenous people from around the world who had been invited to visit and learn about what they're doing there. This was an incredible gathering. We learned so many things about what they're doing there. They have buffalo herds, and they brought back sturgeon. Sturgeon were essentially wiped out of Alabama, lakes and rivers. But they're bringing it back, at least to their village there. And they've also brought back from near extinction something called the guinea hog. And, it's something I'd never heard of. It's just looks like a little boar or something, like a wild boar or something, but just tiny. Um, and, sadly, and I didn't realize they had done this until after they did this, but they fed us a meal of guinea hog. And so I felt sad about that later on, thinking about that. So, but sorry. But anyway, so it's an incredible place and they're doing amazing things there. And they're attempting to live in the traditional ways of their people. One of the incredible things that they discovered is that their people have lost so much. And of course, that's not surprising, but they've lost ceremonies that they know must have existed at one time because living in that way, they've come to realize that they need certain ceremonies in order to live in that traditional way. So they've had to probably do what our ancestors did, way back when anyway, which is pray, fast, and ask for the spirits, the creator, to guide them and help them create new ceremonies. One of the most beautiful things that happened there during this visit, and it sounds so simple, but two of the children have grown up their whole lives there. One's about 6 years old, and the other is probably 5. And they've spent their whole lives there, speaking only Muskogee. They do allow them a little bit of English language television in the evenings from time to time, but for the most part, they speak Muskogee. So now imagine there's this huge, it's almost like a church or something, but it's a huge building that they've constructed there. It's their community hall. And essentially the pillars of this hall are very large tree trunks. And So imagine 60 indigenous people sitting inside of this structure, and this Muskogee family is sitting opposite of us. And, you know, these two children stand up, this 6-year-old, this 5-year-old, and each of them spends about 5 minutes each speaking only Muskogee. Um, sorry, I was get choked up right here, but it was so amazing, and all of us were in tears. Um, it's the dream, I imagined as a father, my own children, standing up and speaking Lakota for 5 minutes, not reciting something, not reading from anything. They might have told, I don't know what they said, by the way. They might have told us what they had for breakfast or, um, but it didn't matter. For 5 minutes, they spoke their indigenous language. I don't know, exactly what it's going to take for us to hold on to our languages, our cultures, to inspire our children to want to take on these struggles. And that's a great burden, on each of us, especially as Indigenous parents. But that day in that place, I was inspired. And so we came home and we decided we were going to do our best. And our eco village isn't going to look like that. It's just not. We're not a single tribe right now. We're many tribes. So the purpose isn't necessarily going to be the preservation of one particular language or one particular culture, indigenous culture. But what it's going to be is an attempt to live in community as indigenous people, to reestablish that sacred hoop. One of the things that I've always struggled with as an indigenous person is I'm a very spiritual person, and I attend Sweat Lodge almost every week. And now I actually run Sweat Lodges here. So, but it wasn't until these encampments that I realized that I've always resented um, people who would try to teach me um, Lakota prayer songs, Lakota songs, certain aspects of our language, of our culture. I've always sort of resented learning these things. And you'll find that with a lot of Native people. It's a very similar thing. Oftentimes, it's non-Native people who learn our languages more so than we do. And I took Lakota language class at the University of South Dakota, and the two people who took the most from that class were non-Native people. I finally realized this past spring why I felt so much resentment about that, about and why I felt so resistant to learning those things. It was because I never really felt like I was ever going to get to speak my language, to sing my Lakota songs as a truly free man. That I would have to only be allowed to speak and do these things, practice these things in boxes, in places, on lands that weren't mine. Um, and that was really hard. That was a hard realization. It was so powerful though to finally realize that and accept that, kind of swallow that pill in a way. And I'll tell you what, man, that spring encampment, being there when we really all felt so empowered and part of that circle, I've never wanted to learn my language so badly. I've never wanted to learn my indigenous songs. I'd been called to be um, a spiritual leader when I was very young. When I was a teenager, I started having what we call Wakina dreams. I would dream of thunder and lightning and tornadoes. And I had a spiritual elder who my mom knew who talked to me about this and said, you're being called to a spiritual life. And to tell that to a 17-year-old boy who, has suffered a lot of trauma in his life and was dealing with alcoholism and terrified of taking on that kind of responsibility. Just, was pretty futile. And it's something that I ran from for a very long time up until April of this year. And it was finally then that I came to realize that this is something that I needed to do. And it was something that the spirits and creator was calling me to do. And it was a responsibility that I finally taken on. Um, so all of this has just been an incredible rebirth for so many of us, and probably me more than anybody. But um, this is what we want to do, and we need help. We need help purchasing land. We need help trying to essentially create, to some degree, a place where we can pray the way we want, live the way we want, because this is a place that we want to live, where we want to live. Sometimes of the year that may be a teepee, sometimes of the year that may be an earth lodge. We don't know yet. I mean, all of that's sort of, to come, to be decided, so to speak. At some point, we want buffalo. We're definitely planning to grow our own food and to be reminded of what it means to be indigenous. And one of the things we really hope to do long term, this is sort of my hope, my dream, is that as we heal ourselves as indigenous people and this reconnection to the land, I can't stress enough of how healing that's going to be and has been for those of us who've really experienced that in our lives. As we heal ourselves and begin to make this reconnection to Unchi Maka, it's only going to be natural that we're going to want to restore Unchi Maka. And to me, that means finding cropland. That means finding, restoring, reclaiming places that, have been lost to development or whatever, restoring those places. And so that's a big part of this too. I don't want this just to be one village, in Nebraska. I want this to be 20 villages around Lincoln and 50, 100 villages around Nebraska. We think so much in scarcity, as indigenous people and people in general, I guess, that, we just want this one thing, just give us this one thing. And that's all we really want. No, that's not what we want. We need so much more than that, and we deserve so much more than that. But this is going to be the start. This is going to be, and if we get this going, we will get this going, by the way, when we get this going. This will be the first time that a traditional indigenous village has existed in Nebraska in over 150 years, from all I can gather. At least 150 years. And it's going to be a model. And when this gets going and when people start to see what we've done, how we've done it, they're going to want to learn. They're going to want to learn how we did it. They're going to want to learn, come and visit. They're going to want to, use the blueprint as much as they can of how we did this. Just the same as us going to Ikuniva Licha was part of a process of learning, how did you do this? What has it been like? All of these questions. We plan to create a model here. This is different than what they're doing there. This is an urban indigenous village. It's going to be populated by people that for the most part come from Lincoln here. And we don't want this to be any further than a half hour from the city. We want people, if they want, to just be able to get off work and come out and sit by the fire for a few hours and then maybe go home. And, because we know that that kind of proximity is going to breed a desire, among our indigenous people who may think that they don't want this kind of a lifestyle, who may think that, this is frivolous or silly or whatever. We know that having that kind of proximity to them, just as it did when we had our protests, we had people coming there every night, and they would come and sit with us and talk about what we had learned and why we were doing what we were doing. And it was so beautiful. And that's what our encampments are like. Every night we have people come from the city, natives and non-natives, and they want to come and learn why we're doing what we're doing. And they want to experience this really incredible thing that we've created. So that's what we want. We want essentially a place where we can live the way we want to live, pray the way we want to pray, and to begin to rebuild our societies. And I don't know how much of this I'm going to see in my lifetime. I'm getting up there in age, and hair is getting a little grayer every day. Lines in my face are getting a little deeper. And, it's but in the end, it shouldn't matter. That shouldn't matter even a little bit. Even if I never see any of this, imagine that. Maybe somebody who I've talked to about this will decide that this is something that they want to do, that this is a charge or a torch that they want to carry from here on out. That would be enough. So here I am. I'm preaching this idea and hoping that maybe somebody will, see some value in it and maybe decide to help us in some way. Or at the very least, think about ways you can do similar things for the indigenous peoples of your communities. Maybe there's somebody doing something similar as this. Maybe you can tell somebody, some native community member from where you live, near where you live, or in the community where you live, about what we're doing here, and get them in touch with me or Marcus from Ikunivalicha. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can think about how to help Indigenous people do this kind of work. It's so, so important, so vital. Um, one of the things that we experienced on that last day of our encampment, that Sunday of our encampment this past spring, it was it's a 4-day encampment, so it goes Thursday through Sunday. And Saturday night's always our biggest day. And we had close to about 110 people or so that showed up for that last Saturday evening. And we have a big feast. We have a indigenous chef here named Anthony Warrior who comes and he'll cook this huge indigenous feast. And we had a city council member come and read a proclamation about one of the few concessions we got from our protest was our mayor reaffirming the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples here in Lincoln, Nebraska. So we have a city council member, Sandra Washington, who comes every year and she'll read this proclamation. And we just have a lot of people come and talk about a lot of different things, including land back, including this Eco Village project that we're talking about tonight. And then we end our evening with what we call a shadow puppet show. This is one of our elders here, Renee Sansosi, who it's just a delightful, if you ever, look into that. It was really one of the highlights of our protest was this evening when she did this shadow puppet show during our protest. And so we make sure we do that every year during our encampment. And it's such a special night. But after the shadow puppet show, we have our lasting EP. I guess our second to lasting EP for the ceremony for the weekend. And then people, typically will go back to their teepees. This past spring, we probably had pretty close to 40 to maybe even 60 people who stayed in teepees that night, that Saturday night. Children, elders, parents, a lot of youth. We made sure the best we could that there were fires within each of the teepees so people could stay up and visit as late as they wanted to. But come morning, I know this is a beautiful thing to see and hear. Children coming out of the teepees and laughing and running through the grass, and seeing elders come out and adults come out and gather by the cook shack and drink coffee and visit and talk about important things. Talk about how can we do this? How can we continue to preserve our language, our culture? Talk about really amazing things about just what it's like to be indigenous, to make jokes about, tease each other about being of this tribe or that tribe, as we do as indigenous people. um and see things like, this was a funny interaction. I remember seeing two Lakota, or I don't know if they're Lakota, sorry, but two indigenous boys, young boys, who had come and started trying to play in the fire. And their mother came and scolded them and say, "Hey, stay away from the fire, stay away from the fire, you're gonna get hurt." But sort of standing back myself and thinking, how else are they going to learn about fire? How else are they going to learn how to deal with this spirit, that was always such an important part of our villages. Um, so, but it was such an amazing thing to see this village come to life this morning. And yeah, just really, really reinforced, this work that many of us now are working toward. So I wanted to mention a few things here. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. So one of the things that's happened since our spring encampment is there's an organization some of you may have heard of or maybe even part of called the Decolonial Repair Network. Excuse me. I'll get a drink of water here. And this is essentially a group of primarily non-native people who gather regularly to talk about ways to support land return to native people. And if you don't mind putting that link, maybe it's already there in the chat, to the Honor Native Land Fund. So the Honor Native Land Fund is essentially the vehicle by which the Decolonial Repair Network has decided to work to fund different kinds of land returns. And to date, they've only taken on 2 projects, and one of which is an indigenous hub that this organization called the Great Plains Action Society is building in Iowa City. This is a really interesting idea. It's a very small parcel of land in the middle of kind of near downtown Iowa City. And it's about an acre, and it's really just kind of a square block, but they've purchased the land now, and they want to create essentially a place where indigenous people from the area can come and grow crops, where they have a large kitchen and gathering space where they want to teach people how to prepare indigenous foods, hopefully much of which they grow there. They also want to have holistic healing places too, where people can come and take part in different kinds of holistic healing. And they've got a lot of other ideas. They want to create like kind of business incubators where indigenous people can come and maybe sell their arts and crafts in the hopes of turning this into some kind of a larger business enterprise. So it's a really kind of groundbreaking thing, and so if you do get a chance, take a look at what they're doing there. The second project, and we're fortunate and love to say this, is that it's Nisquithé Prayer Camp's Eco Village, and this is something that we launched essentially at our spring encampment, but it was a very soft launch because we had a lot of work left to do in terms of having a place where people can learn about what we're trying to do. So I don't know if that links in there to the Nisquithé Tomo page, but that's essentially the landing site for our village and where you can go and learn about what I've talked about, but also how you can help and some of the different partners that we have in this project. Our 501c3, because Nisquithé Prayer Camp is not a 501c3, we're essentially a collective. But we have a 501c3 Intertribal Spiritual Lodges, which I'm actually the chair of. So, it's an organization that, some of us are already piloting anyway. But this is going to be essentially the funnel, the administrator of any funds that we get. So, but these funds will then flow toward this project, this land return effort. And we've done a lot of legal research. This has taken a lot of effort, a lot of research to really understand how to do something like this. We've had to talk to lawyers, we've had to talk to real estate people, and other people have done. I've visited 3 different eco villages this summer to learn about how they have constructed these kinds of places legally, physically, all of these things. We plan to create essentially a cooperative. And the cooperative, essentially, everybody will have equal ownership within that cooperative of this land. The cooperative will have a board and, probably committees within that board. And the land itself will be put into a trust. So, all of that's to say we've done our homework, that we've done a lot of work trying to figure out the best way to do this. A 501c3 model actually wasn't the best way to do this. Our 501c3 sponsor right now, they won't have direct um, um, supervision, whatever. They won't oversee essentially what we're doing. They're just essentially the financial support network that we'll have. It'll be the cooperative that manages the village. And there's some beauty in this. One of the reasons we decided to go this route is that many of you in nonprofit in the nonprofit world may agree or not agree, but what I've found, I've done a lot of nonprofit work, is that these things can become very political, and and it's tough sometimes to overcome some of these personality sort of conflicts we have. Not that a cooperative is going to deal with this. There's really no way around that completely in this whole human experience we have. But a cooperative model in itself, if you think about everybody has an equal vote, an equal share of this property, that does remove some of the politics. It isn't a situation where, we can have you removed or, you're just going to have a lot more independence to decide how you think this place should be managed as, an equal share owner of this place. So so that's what we've come to. This is kind of the legal, financial framework that we're looking at. But there are also some challenges that I know we're going to be facing, such as people living in community like this, in a place like this, in the way that we want to live, whether it's teepees or earth lodges. In Minnesota, they've established several eco villages through an organization called Dakota Makoche Ikchuchipe. Sorry, I'm murdering that now. But something like that. Dakota Makoche Chuchipi, I think. Anyway, so they have at least, as far as I know, three eco villages in Minnesota, one of which has, and it's about 17 acres is all, but has seven earth lodges on it that are going to house seven different Dakota families. But in order to be able to do that, in order to be able to have seven families living on a 17-acre parcel in earth lodges, they had to make certain changes within the state legal system, within state law. So, my fear is we're probably going to be facing some similar challenges here in Nebraska. But this is all part of the experiment, right? I mean, this is all part of it. Yes, it'd be great if this all happened tomorrow, or next year or the year after, but this may take a while. This may take a lot of effort. This may take a lot of, findings, as we would say, strange bedfellows to support us and what we're doing because we're definitely in a red state. So trying to figure out how we can make this happen. You know, I spent 18 years at the Lincoln Journal-Star here, and in that time, I covered every single beat you can think of, the county board, the state government, city council, our educational system. I know the players. I know the politics. I understand the pressure points. Um, that doesn't mean that, I have I have a lot of enemies here because of the protests, because of the different social justice sort of actions I've taken, but I still understand the way things work here. And so I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that we can do what we need to do here. We have a lot of support. We have so many people from, you know, Lincoln actually is a blue city within a red state. And, we have a mostly Democratic city council. We have a Democratic mayor, Democratic school board. Um, so we have a lot of support here, and I know we can make this happen. On the state level, that's another question, but I think we're hopeful there too. I know Native people tend to enjoy some amount of bipartisanship, some amount. I realize that's changing under the current administration, but for many, many years, we have enjoyed some amount of bipartisanship. So we're hopeful that'll happen too. But the road ahead is going to be long, but we're ready for the fight, and we're realistic. We're not. Trust me, there are no Pollyannas in this organization. We know that this is going to be a hard fight. Many of us have been fighting it for a really long time, and we have so much at stake here, though. Um, I told a group of people recently that I was when I was born, and I was born in North Dakota rather. And my family was the family where that owned the land where the shootout occurred that Leonard Peltier was involved in. It's the Jumping Bull compound. That's my family, the Jumping Bulls. Um, I would the I was brought home as a baby, a newborn infant, about 3 weeks after the shootout. And so I lived those first years of my life essentially in a war zone. Um, and in some ways, I've lived ever since then, and to some degree, in that kind of a place. It's everybody talks about dystopian futures, and we watch these sci-fi movies about post-apocalyptic this or that. This society that we're living in right now is the dystopian future of my indigenous ancestors. And I don't want my children, I don't want their children, I don't want my grandchildren's grandchildren to have to live in this dystopian future. I want them to be able to live the way that they're always meant to live, and in connection and harmony with nature and with one another. So that's a long road. That's going to take generations probably. But if we don't start it now, it's never going to happen. So that's what I wanted to say. I want to thank all of you for staying with me here, and I know we wanted to give some time for question and answers. So thank you.
Miigwech, Kevin, thank you. We're going to give Paula just a minute to look at the questions that people have posed in the chat box, and that gives me an opportunity to say something. I'm so moved by this, and I have so many thoughts, so many things I'd like to acknowledge and ask you about, but I'm going to limit myself to one comment and one question so that we can get ready for your questions. So much of what you're talking about makes me think of what it feels like to go home to the reservation, to go home where you have family, to go home where you're related, to go home where you feel connected to a piece of land. And what you're talking about is creating that where we are, instead of wishing for that, instead of missing that, instead of not having it where we are, because of course this is all our land, really. So that I'm very moved by that. And one of the big things I appreciate when I go back home is language, and we've lost our language in one generation. We went from my parents being fluent in native languages, and we don't speak anything, the eight of us. And I've always been resentful of that ever since I was very, very young. I remember thinking about it a lot as a college student, how language is a window onto culture, and you really can't see through that window if you don't know the words. And you don't really know what you're missing because you don't have those nuances, that language. So I have a question for you about language. You talked about the Muskogee kids, or the Muskogee kids who spoke for 5 minutes each. And you found that very moving. And of course, I did too. I was wiping away my own tears here, thinking of that possibility for all of our children, right? So, and I know you don't have that same setup in Nebraska because you were dealing with multiple tribes, but do you think that recovering and maintaining our languages is essential to what you're trying to do over the long term?
I do. I do. I want to tell a story here, as I do as a storyteller. But so, you know, one of the things that Marcus from Ikuniva Licha explained to us was that the Muskogee language, many languages differentiate typically between gender, between male and female. Lakota is that way too. The Muskogee language differentiates between speakers, but only in one way. So the way that they differentiate in their languages is as such. We say we address things that are ours differently than we do address things that are not ours. So I might call my arm something different than I would call your arm. In a sense, what this is it's an understanding that we only have agency over ourselves, and everything else beyond that, while a relative, um, is to be respected, is to be understood as something in and of itself. And if you think about this, and if you take that a little further, you'll understand why in that village in Alabama, they don't cut a tree down unless that they've prayed and talked to that tree, and that tree has told them that it's okay, because that tree isn't theirs. The tree is itself, and if it wants to sacrifice itself for the people, um, then that's okay. But they don't always cut these trees down. So it's that sort of understanding that on a very, very, very deep level, indigenous people understood, you know, that this physical world isn't ours to manipulate and exploit as we wish, or at least it shouldn't be. And and that understanding from them comes from birth, from learning the language. So that to me is, I think, a good example of why it's important to preserve these languages.
Thank you for that. I think that's exactly right. It's in the language. And
Mm-hmm.
the way we're supposed to live and be connected to other things is in the language. So,
Mm-hmm.
Paula, do you want to go ahead and share some of the questions that people have posted?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to do that. And Kevin, thank you so much for this. Was quite a journey that you took us all on with you, and I'm just full of appreciation to you for it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question here, and this is actually the only question that I have in the chat right now, I think. This is from a non-native person who is part of a prayer camp at Oak Flat, and which is the sacred land of the Apache people. She says, "Thank you for your story. I'm curious how non-Indigenous people or organizations have shown up for you in your protest, occupation, encampments, and your subsequent work. Could you share your experience with your non-Indigenous allies and accomplices and what you've learned in working with them? What
Mm-hmm.
advice or lessons or insights would you offer non-Indigenous people who desire to accompany you and other Indigenous-led movements toward healing and relationships?"
It's funny as you ask this question. One of the people I see on my screen up above there is a man, and I have had a long history. You know, our daughters went to the same um, daycare. You know, so we've known each other. My daughter's 19, so 15 years, and came to our protest several times, and he's been to probably, if not every rally we've ever hosted, 90% of them, and shows up all the time, not just for us, for so many different causes here. I want to recognize does amazing things and is an incredible ally. Thank you for that. Another one is she's with the Unitarian Church here in Lincoln, and the Unitarian Church has been such an amazing supporter of ours. They brought us food during our protest. They brought us food during our encampment. They give us a place to meet whenever we want, to have our planning meetings, and they're always doing things for our Indigenous community. So I want to recognize as well, and the Unitarian Church of Lincoln. And there are other churches that have supported us, including the largest, I would say, well, I don't know if this is true, but First Plymouth Congregational Church here in Lincoln is another supporter of ours. And that's a very large church, very liberal church. And then the church that I attend from time to time, Vine Congregational, is another church that supported us. We also have a group of professors from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln here, who formed an organization. It doesn't really have a name. It's just kind of a Nisquithe professor support group, but they've been huge supporter of ours, and you know they've done a lot of things, in addition to what we've done. They've circulated petitions and they've held protests outside of the developer's office where, the developer of the land across from our Inipi grounds. And they've done so many things, raise funds and food and, been constant supporters of what we're doing. And we've had a lot of other supporters as well, who have come and attempted to figure out how they can be part of what we're doing or advance what we're doing, connect us to potential funders, and help us start to think about ways to write grants and consider other sort of financial mechanisms, not just grant funding, but loans and how to finance loans and how to pay back loans and things like that. So we're looking at all kinds of different, legal or rather financial mechanisms to make all this happen. But it has been largely our non-native allies who have helped sort of guide us and kind of teach us some of these things that most of us just unfortunately not having been, had the same kind of lives of privilege as many others, just really haven't understood. And so it's been really important to have that sort of support. So those are the ones I can think of right off. There are plenty of other sort of organizations that have helped us, non-native groups and people, individuals. One of the things that happened too is that the land where we have our TP encampment is owned by a family here in town that showed up really big for us during the protests and all of our rallies and efforts afterward. And it's a beautiful 80-acre property that they let us use. And they actually let us set up a sweat lodge there. I actually poured there on Sunday. And we say pour, that means run a sweat lodge. But so that family, has been a huge, huge benefit to us in giving us access to these lands. And hopefully one day I hope to buy those lands. But anyway, that's another conversation. So thank you.
So the last part of that question, Kevin, and I am not seeing other questions in the chat. So if those of you who are listening, if you do have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat. And I am realizing that it may just be that we are all feeling so full, as I am, and feeling what we really want to do is sit with all of this, Kevin. So I think your message went to our hearts, and so we may not be jumping right in with our brains. But there is this second part of the question that is, what lessons or advice would you offer non-native people who desire to accompany you and other Indigenous-led movements?
Forgive my interruption. Paula, the chat maybe has just recently changed slightly. So when you go to the chat, you may have different chats that you have to click on. I know there's been at least one other person who tried to send you a chat message.
Okay, I'll see that. Thank you. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah. Oh, sorry there. I started thinking about the other thing. So the question was, can you rephrase that?
If you have any advice or
Okay. Got it. Yep.
suggestions
So,
for non-native people.
yeah, that's a whole nother seminar. But I just say generally, just understand that, when you go into places where you want to support Indigenous people, you're in their house, and we need you. We can't do this alone, but we're the drivers, and you have to take your lead from us. That's tough sometimes. I hate to say this, but it's tough for some of the settlers, colonized people, natives too at times, to understand that they don't always know best, and especially in these sort of efforts that we're doing, we don't want to do things the way that they've always been done, the way that the colonizers, have done them. We're trying to do things differently. So you need to understand that we have brilliant minds among us, and we have people who've got just incredible talent and experience, huge hearts, who understand how to make these kinds of things happen. And we call upon them anytime that we do this kind of work. And it's so important to have other kinds of allyship, of course, but you need to understand and trust that we need to be the drivers of these things. So.
And a question from someone in Nebraska, how can we find out more about the next encampment that will be in the LinkedIn area?
Yeah. The easiest way is to look at our website, Nesquite Prayer Camp, or rather our Facebook. Sorry, not our website. Our website's a mess right now. But the Nesquite Prayer Camp Facebook page, they'll have information. We'll have information there. We're actually, I think within a few days, actually, our Nesquite Prayer Camp website will have information about the encampment on it. But it's going to take probably a couple days before that's there. So certainly the Facebook page is a way to find that information. So.
The other messages here are all thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We thank you so much, Kevin. This has just, like Paula said, been a journey. So we do want to have everyone, if they will respond to a prompt, what is an important takeaway for you from this program? And if you could put that in the chat, and we'll share some of your responses. So what is an important takeaway for you from this program? And we'll just take a minute to do that, and we'll read some of the responses. Yeah, and the prompt is in the chat box. Steadfastness. That gathered community breathes life into the land, and the land breathes life into the community. That land back takes so many different forms. Patience, kindness, and respect are necessary in all encounters. Perseverance. The depth of the connectedness for Indigenous peoples to land and creatures. Listening to the spirit. I heard it's a long and necessary effort we're looking at. I need to listen to more stories like the ones you shared tonight, Kevin. That it is possible to support Resurgent, which feels like a good partner to protest. The idea that this is slow to work, thinking 7 generations ahead. Thank you all for your comments. And there's one I want to share. When asking my 8-year-old grandchild what he liked best about school, he attends a Cherokee immersion school. He didn't say the usual, like recess or lunch. He said, "I love learning about my Cherokee culture." Thank you for bringing the stories to us. And there's a few more. Making a connection and hearing impactful words of hope and community possibilities, resilience. I'm in Atlanta on Muskogee land and very interested to hear they have a community. So that's a possibility to grow relationships by supporting them. Thank you so much. If I can get back to seeing you all here somewhere. Here we go. Thank you so much for your comments. I'm going to make some announcements right now. Thank you for all of you for coming. But I want to announce some online TRR programs Mackenzie is going to be posting links to registration and information about these programs in the chat. So Saturday, September 13th, from 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll have the Toward Right Relationship Workshop, Roots of Injustice, Seeds of Change, Toward Right Relationship with Native Peoples. This is the workshop that Kevin referred to at the beginning of his talk. So that's Saturday, September 13th. And there'll also be a TRR workshop, the same workshop, on October the 4th. And I don't know the time for that one. Paula, do you have that?
It's the same time, 4 to 6 p.m.
4 to
Eastern.
6 p.m. Eastern, okay. And then on Tuesday, October 28th, from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We say these in Eastern time, so you can work backwards from there or forward. Richard William, Cheyenne and Oglala Lakota, will present a webinar with the title, Whose Land Is It? Rick is with us tonight, so we're really excited about Rick's talk too. It's equally compelling as Kevin's. You will want to hear him share his story, and he is quite the storyteller himself. So thank you, Rick, for coming tonight, and thank you for offering this talk on October 28th from 8 to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And now, before we close, we would really appreciate it if you'd fill out a brief evaluation form. Mackenzie will post a link to the form in the chat, and you can click on the link and fill out the form right now. It will only take a couple of minutes. Again, thank you all for coming tonight, spending part of your evening with us, and I hope that we see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Kevin.